Hey YouTube, I want to talk about transphobia. And so I think that this is probably a discussion I should have had before making the video I did a couple weeks ago. Because I think it would be helpful if everybody was sort of on the same page regarding what is and isn't transphobic, or what is transphobia. And I think, that would obviously be helpful. But beyond that, I think it would have been helpful to make sure to point out that just because an idea or an action or a belief or a statement is transphobic doesn't mean that the person, making that statement or doing that thing is necessarily a bad person or even a transphobe. It is just saying that, hey, whatever this action or statement or idea or position is, it's transphobic, but you can separate that from the person. And I think that maybe my video came across a little bit too accusatory, and so I apologize for that. And I think that this discussion should hopefully help kind of explain where I was coming from in that video. And so transphobia, if you take it kind of at the literal definition, means that it's a fear or an aversion of, of trans people. And I think that kind of helps, start us down the definition, but I don't think that is by any means kind of fully representative of what the word entails. A lot of people argued with me that transphobia is actually much more severe than that, where it is active discrimination, such as preventing trans people from using the bathroom of their target gender, keeping them out of the workplace, or even hate crimes, and that those things are transphobic. Yes, those clearly are transphobic, but using that as kind of your definition, sort of sets the bar for transphobia at a, very far extreme, when there are things that you can do to be transphobic that are, nowhere near severe as that. And you don't actually have to discriminate against somebody to be transphobic. Transphobia is at its core, I think, like racism and sort of these other ideas, basically about othering an entire group of people, in this case trans folks, and generally that othering comes with a, they are less than or not as valuable as, or, some sort of judgment call with that. It's like a bias or a belief that you're applying to an entire group of people, generally not with a, solid basis for making that bias or belief, but then usually never with kind of good intentions behind it. And so what are things that are transphobic? Like, yes, keeping a trans woman out of the women's bathroom would be transphobic. Bashing her brains in would be transphobic. Not dating her only because she's a trans person would be transphobic. Saying that there's a right way to be trans, whether that is, all trans people need to seek surgery, or all trans people, need to do X, Y, or Z, those things would also be somewhat transphobic. And you could even say that no one will ever love me because I'm trans. That is internalized transphobia. That is othering yourself and making a sort of value judgment because of the fact that you're trans. And so you can see that transphobia is kind of a matter of degree, with some types of transphobia being obviously much more problematic than others. However, just because somebody or something even sort of trans-related is present doesn't necessarily mean that transphobia is. So, for example, several weeks ago, Sarah Silverman did a video where she talked about the gender wage gap. And as part of the video, she did a joke about having a sex change to become a man so that she could make more money. And a lot of trans activists came out and sort of blasted Sarah Silverman and said that this video is transphobic because it makes light of all these different trans issues. And it's like, well, I guess I understand those arguments from a technical perspective, but I disagree with them kind of in their entirety because it was a video about the gender wage gap, and she was, using the joke as a vehicle to describe how ridiculous it is that a woman should even think about or consider being a man in order to close that wage gap. So that's not necessarily transphobic. However, just last week I saw a TV episode, Fox's Marry Me, where they talk about a guy buying a vagina. And the character they were referencing happens to be a trans character, but reducing a trans person to their genitals and kind of putting it that way seemed like a little bit of a transphobic, insensitive joke. And it's obviously not an awful one. There have been much worse jokes out there in the media with trans people as the punchline, but it was still a little bit transphobic. And, so where exactly is the line drawn between what is and isn't transphobia? It's a little bit hard to tell sometimes. But ultimately, if you are othering trans people and you're making a value judgment, probably transphobic. If you're suggesting that all trans people are alike or should be alike, again, probably transphobic. Basically, if you would replace trans with a different descriptor, be that race or class or anything like that, and the statement or position becomes potentially problematic, then it's probably transphobic. And I think that's sort of an easy way to look at the word transphobia, look at what it means, and then start to think about how if somebody says, hey, your position feels transphobic or your position is transphobic, that you can sit down as an ally or a trans person or whoever and say, you know what, maybe you're right. Maybe saying I could never be attracted to a trans person is transphobic because I'm suggesting that all trans people are the same and that they are somehow not the same as anyone else that I would consider dating. And so I don't want to kind of get back into that video subject here, but I do want to point out that it's sort of a transphobic position to take, and you can always go back and rewatch that video and sort of see if you agree or disagree with me after understanding where I'm coming from with respect to what transphobia is.